Welcome to Beyond the Screen, an IONOS podcast, where we share insights and tips to help you scale your business's online presence, hosting genuine conversations with the best in the web and IT industry, and exploring how the IONOS brand can help professionals and customers with their hosting and cloud issues. We're your hosts, Joe Nash and Liz Moy. Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Screen, an IONOS podcast. Today we're joined by Matty Stratton, whose career has spanned DevOps, cloud engineering, and open source data platforms, taking on a variety of new challenges, including roles as PagerDuty's DevOps advocate and Ivan's Director of Developer Relations. An influential voice in the tech community, Matty has had an immense impact in organizations like Red Hat and Pulumi, but he has also become a beacon of knowledge and entertainment in the DevOps space, hosting platforms like DevOps Party Games, of which I'm a huge fan, and the Arrested DevOps podcast. Matty is a champion of change and a true advocate for stepping out of your comfort zone in the pursuit of growth in the tech industry. Matty, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, thank you. By the way, I have a new bio to put on all of my socials now because that was amazing.
Credit entirely to our wonderful researchers here on the show.
Yeah,
they do a wonderful job of making your guests welcome. Yeah, we'll make sure you get that. So welcome. As you know, it's fitting that we start with that bio because of course here we are to talk about, you know, embarking on new roles in the tech industry, stepping out of your comfort zone, and we hit a whole lot of beats in there, a lot of different parts of your journey. So, you know, across that, we mentioned, you know, several companies, mentioned several roles, we mentioned several different like whole industry sectors. Could you take us on that journey? Walk us through your career path. Like, what has led into all these different transitions? I think.
Yeah. I mean, the word that comes to mind is serendipity, right? And I will say, I sometimes this is sometimes a fun game to play, and sometimes one that can lead you down a path of regret. And I try to not do that, but it's always kind of interesting to me to sit there and say, like, maybe it's like a sliding doors thing, right? It's like this one little innocuous thing. I would not be anywhere near this place I'm at if that thing didn't happen. And I will tell you, it's going to just bear with me. It'll only take a second to get to this place. But one of the reasons you and I would not be having this conversation if not for something that some kind of jerky scene partner I had in high school said to me. So I was on the speech team when I was in my sophomore year in high school, and we did a duet acting thing. And I'd never really done this before. It was fun and interesting. And my scene partner was very involved in the plays. And there was a certain point when we were practicing with our coach and figuring out when we were going to practice over holiday break. And my scene partner was like, oh, well, I can't do X date because we're going to Theater Fest. We're taking the play to Theater Fest. And the coach said, oh, Matt, are you going too? And he goes, why would he be going? And I was like, okay, jerko, guess who's trying out for the play now? And then the way this got me there was so that I ended up originally going to college as a theater major, as an acting and directing major. Which I dropped out of. And then went back to a different school as a computer programming major, which I then dropped out of. Quite the
switch, but
Right. Well, I always knew, if you look at, it's kind of funny, if you look at my senior bio in the theater club in high school, it said, it's like, where do you see yourself in 10 years? And I said I was either going to be a happy but unsuccessful actor or a successful but miserable computer programmer. So I knew it was going to go down one of those ways, right? So anyway, the point is, and we won't go down the whole storied career of theater and movies and things that I did, but it's important to know that I have that background, right? That was the thing. And but then I dropped out of school and I had to get a job, and I started working for a local computer company that there was an Apple service center. So I learned how to fix that, but they also were a fleggling ISP. This was back in the mid 90s. And so I became the webmaster for like our local homepages for our users. So I taught myself HTML, but a lot of it becomes the serendipity. I want to talk about the serendipity. I didn't know anything about Windows, just as an important part. Like, that was not my background, but I ended up, when I was doing a lot of this Apple work, we had companies that were like pre-press and printing companies. And so they would all use Macs for their designers, but the back end, their pre-press RIP stations were Windows NT. So I had to learn a little bit about that. And then I ended up getting a random job as a system integrator. And then I learned Windows. And I spent 20 years as a Windows back office engineer for financial companies and insurance companies. And somewhere along the way, I got interested in DevOps, which I always feel like I'm new to the DevOps scene, but every year I become, having been involved in it a longer period of time. It's fun if you go data mining through old Twitter, you can find some really bad takes I had about DevOps.
Who amongst us has not had bad takes? It's fine.
Yeah, well, they weren't bad, but they were the things that you were like, well, who patches the servers in DevOps? And I was like, because that's, but yeah, so I kind of went down that road. And while I was working for a living, running infrastructure for a bunch of companies, I, would occasionally get invited to give talks, to be like, as a customer, be like, hey, come speak about what you've done there. And having studied improv and acting and direct, all these things are fun to me. And after a while, started to learn that could be an actual job doing that. And then I spent some time in developer advocacy, which is when I started at PagerDuty, run over to kind of do advocacy there, and then have done this for a couple, bunch of years. And now I'm able to lead a team. But I've always wanted to be close to things that are, interesting to me. One of the things I used to say when I worked at Chef, which was before per PagerDuty, I used to say, I work at Chef because I believe in Chef. I don't believe in Chef because I work at Chef.
Sure.
That is also, by the way, a good way to like burn yourself out and have a really unhealthy relationship with the company that you work for. But you know, but I always sort of say, like, I want to feel like the product that I'm selling, and we're all selling something, or that I'm supporting, or that I'm enabling, is making someone's life better somehow. And it's not like that Silicon Valley thing, like we're trying to change the world, but just like that was the thing with like Chef is a great example. Like I had been in that nonsense, and I knew that if you use this, it wouldn't make you bajillions of dollars. It wouldn't, you know, like make your kids listen to you or anything, but your life would suck a little less, right?
That's
like,
a discrete thing that you're doing every day. That would be a marginally less painful if you use this.
Yeah, and that's what I like. Like, I want to be somewhere I say, okay, I understand. I've talked before about how I feel like I do DevRel on easy mode because it's easy to have empathy for someone that is
who is you.
Right. So it's fun. Like now where I'm at now, and I'm running developer relations for a data company. I don't have that built-in empathy for our types of users because I'm not a software developer at heart. I'm not a data person, but luckily I'm a manager. Right. Like my joke is, I said I couldn't get a job on my own team as an individual contributor. And that's actually probably what helps make me a better manager.
That's fascinating. And that leads me really neatly into asking, so, we're kind of talking about the jump from, industry to industry, from role to role, from college degree to college degree, from IC to manager, like from stepping up into the leadership role, I guess, seats. Like, how did that come about? Were there any like parts of that transition that, you found particularly difficult or helpful?
Yes. And I've been through it twice now. It was one of those 50-50 jobs. Like, you're supposed to be 50% manager, 50% engineer, which means it's a 75-75. The great Ron Swanson says, don't half-ass two jobs, whole-ass one job. That's a lesson for
Perfect
you.
One.
But as I worked there for a while and built out the tech ops team there, and I became a director, so manager of managers, and I was running a big function. And I got a new CTO at one point that I reported to. And after I had worked for them for a little bit, he kind of pulled me aside and said, Matty, he's like, I don't think managing people is what gets you out of bed every day. I think you want to do things. And I was like, okay. And he said, I think I want to make you our infrastructure architect. And I said, I didn't know that was a job that we could have over here. And it was, interestingly, I said, I have two constraints, two caveats, two requirements, conditions. I have two conditions. One, I want to make the same money. Like, you cannot, like, this needs to come along with that.
You're not lateral moving.
I need you to write a letter to give to my, at the time, wife and father-in-law that this is not a demotion. That's a great, But if you think about it, like, luckily we are starting to become in a world where you can be very, very senior as an IC. But a lot of times
the path, the way people think you do business and jobs,
I did that. And this change back to IC kind of happened. This was circa like 2013 or so. And then shortly after that, I moved into some other roles, and I fought I fought management, but I also fought being management for many years. And I have a friend who has had this history where he goes to a new place, and he's an amazing engineer, and he stays there till they insist on making him a manager, and then he leaves because he's like, that's not what I do. And he's actually been at his current company for, I think, the last 7 years. And that's, I think, was part of the point, was he said, look, just so you know, do not ever make me a manager. That's not what I do. And I will go somewhere else.
But anyway, tech companies love to make senior engineers managers rather than hiring managers.
And it's and I think it's actually pretty cool that the place that he's at, they were like, okay, well, that's the deal that we made. So I very much resisted management. I was in a lot of roles that were leadership. I was leading teams. I was doing all this, but I said, I don't want to be a people manager. And about a little bit over a year ago, when I was looking for something new, and I said, I think it was time for a change for me to sort of shift. And I said, okay, I would like to be able to run a function. And also, I'm trying to change what I do. And also I said, I think I've done a lot over the last, 5-6 years about like understanding how to build a really great program around developer relations and developer advocacy. I can stop doing that now. And also this is partially as we go through it. And it's been really good to come through it again. It's one of those things where, and I think that's an important thing for people to understand is like your career will do these little, like, not even ups and downs, but sometimes taking time away and doing something different helps you be better at that other thing. That's true even in developer advocacy in general, as we take steps away from being a DevRel and maybe go do some pure engineering for a while, go work in product for a while. You come back, you're even more powerful and effective. But the transition from IC to manager, again, in this has been easier for two reasons. One being what I alluded to, which is I actually can't do the job, so to speak. I can, but I can't. You know what I mean? Like you couldn't, the things that the amazing DAs on my team do, you don't want me getting up there and giving a deep dive talk about Kafka. Nobody wants that, unless you want it for comedy. Maybe we'll do that. So that tendency we have as highly skilled ICs to be managers, we're like, well, I'll just do it. And that's very hard. So
and you can't do that impulse. So that's great.
Yeah, I can't do that in this case. I mean, there's still plenty of places I could be better. And I'm sure my team who's listening is saying like, okay, wait, Matty, let me tell you all the 15 times you should just let us do it and stop doing it. One of the things that was really powerful, the company I was at, Classified Ventures, which Apartments.com was part of, when I first became a manager, I was hired in as a manager. But one of the things they realized is they said they had such a culture of promoting within that when they looked at all the managers across the company, the majority of them were first-time manager. So they did a really big investment in training. They did a manager training, and then it was so successful, they also then did it for directors, and I took it later. And there's this fella named Bill Joy, who I still try to do work with. And but one of the everything I think about management, almost everything, the foundational stuff comes from that. And it was super powerful. But one of the things that we talked about in there was the various manager transitions we do through our careers. You go from IC to manager to director to senior director to VP and everything. And every transition along that way is a challenge. The hardest one is the first one. Once you've done that, now it's nuance, right? It's sort of like learning a new programming language, but the first programming language you learn is the hardest one because you have to learn to think like a programmer, right? But then when you're like, okay, I learned C++, well, now I need to learn Ruby. Okay, well, it's a dialect at that point, right? It's a nuance, but learning that first jump, and that's the hardest thing. And to your point, like you said, we love to just take senior engineers and just make them managers, and we don't set them up. Lindsay Homewood has a great blog post called It's Not a Promotion, It's a Career Change. And I know Charity Majors has written about this extensively, but I love Lindsay's post has been around for forever. But that's the thing. It's a different kind of job. And it's totally okay to be incredibly senior as an IC. I love as a manager that if my direct reports make more money than I do. That should be totally fine. So
it's not, the management, I said, different career, not necessarily like a recognition that you are better at that job than the person you reports to you, right? I think that's very key. So, you touched on this a little bit in talking about it. I want to kind of drill deep on this idea that you have stepped in lots of different industries, different careers. Lots of people, I think, particularly now as, the tech stacks get ever deeper and it feels like you need to be ever more specialized. And so the idea of making those sideways steps is very intimidating. How do you deal with stepping out of your comfort zone in terms of your role, in terms of what you work in, and making those transitions to something new? Like, how have you approached, I guess, getting over the fear of like, oh, is this role going to take me in a different direction to where I've been before, and that kind of stuff?
Part of it just comes from being older and having been through it. And
a long history of having done that. Yeah.
Right. And that's serendipity. And I had a mentor years ago who I was at a crossroads at one point and was like, okay, I had two possible opportunities. I'm like, do I do this one or this one? And he said, look, it's not about the next job. It's about the next job. So what do you want to do next? And which one of these will take you there and the other one won't, or could take you there. And so that's a lot of how I think about that. So number one, but having that evidence of that it does a little bit, it's sort of like as we get older, you start to believe a little bit more like it's all going to work out. It's probably fine. We like to say this in DevOps, like it's probably fine. But as you said, as you go up, on one hand, the statement can be as you want to become more expert, you should become more specialized. But I would challenge that a little bit, because when we start to look at people who become more and more senior in organizations, they actually become broader.
Right.
And what do we talk about with principal engineers? Principal engineers don't write code. I mean, you write some, but you need to be, but to do those type of very senior roles, and there are exceptions. Right. There are places where like you can be at the super senior level, but yes, there is a market for this person that knows this one particular library and framework so well. And you know what? The world needs two of them, right? But the world needs lots of engineers who understand how the broader ecosystem of your application and infrastructure and system and business work. Right. So it's a superpower to be able to know more things shallowly. Right. But where you're shallow is your awareness of how those things work, and where you're deep is the glue, the connective tissue between the T-shaped this application. Or the M-shaped person, even if we want to really, which those are rough, because then you're like, be super great at lots of things, but also generalist about everything. This is something I've been looking as I've been going through my, like, how do I expand? And I'm doing this myself right now. I'm saying, okay, I have things that I am really comfortable at, right? Like I've been doing them. I could sit and churn this out, right? But what's the longevity of it? And as talking to a mentor, said, Matt, not a lot of companies have a chief DevRel officer. So if I want to move on, so I'm learning about how do I expand into understanding things like developer growth, how to understand other kinds of marketing, not to make my DevRel team a marketing team, right? But because you're thinking, but where do these things connect? And then also, and I will say this, I mean, I'll call it out right now. Like, even though he's my boss, I'm not doing this to like gas up my boss, but we have a new CMO at Ivan. He's been there he's been the CMO for a while, and he came from DevRel. And I'll tell you, as someone running a DevRel team, it's freaking amazing when your CMO came from DevRel, because they get it. The same thing as he looked through his career, it's like, how do you see how these things work together? But what I'm getting at is you can move into those areas, and then your other expertise makes you even more powerful there, and being able to understand it. So, and even if we talk about, if you're like, okay, I don't care about that, I want to be like really technical engineering, whatever, even so the same thing. The best principal engineers are the ones who understand how the business works, how the broad ideas. So the more that you can have I don't want to say a passing knowledge of those things, but that's the thing. So it's actually the way you get again, it's scary. Trying to learn something new is scary. Don't get me wrong, right? Not to dismiss it, but to help get over the hump is why, right? Because the thing is, you're like, okay, I'm going to ask myself to put in a big investment of learning something new. That could be scary, that I could fail. And it's, if you want to just drill it down to a cost benefit analysis, the benefit is it can leapfrog me, because now I have better knowledge and whatever. And if that's not something you want, then it's okay. But Jeffrey Snover said this on my podcast once many years ago, where we talked about, expanding. And he said, if you want to never learn something new, then go work in lumber. I think we've learned everything there is to know about wood. But I also feel like every time that came up, I'm like, someone's listening to this. It's like, my uncle is like the chief of the lumber council, and there is all this innovation in wood. But
as a woodworker, that gave me feelings. But I get where he's coming from. Okay, so I want to, before I drop the thread, I want to dive into something and follow there. So, obviously you spoke about DevRel and that idea that, there's not that many companies need a chief DevRel officer. And I think that leads us into, I guess, another topic that's inherent in making these switches, which is, there's kind of your internal fears about, hey, do I know enough to do this? How's it going to impact my my future thing? But also, this is inherently a big commitment, a big investment, moving from familiar to new. And there is uncertainty in that. And, especially in DevRel, that is something we're very well versed with. How do you navigate that? I'm putting, well, not necessarily put my career on my mouth, it's a bit drastic, but like I'm taking, where I am, going for this new thing, and it could all blow up. It could be for many reasons. How do you deal with that uncertainty?
So I will say one of the ways that I deal with it, or that makes it easier, and this is a very important caveat, is I'm a white dude.
Sure.
Okay, so the risk is less. It's very easy, not very easy. And the reason I'm going to bring this up is saying I'm doing this on easy mode, and it's still scary to, as someone who's supposed to be an expert. And again, as a dev, because the scary thing is like, you're, saying, okay, well, I'm going to try to learn this thing in the open, and people are watching me do it. Right. And then if I make people, the concern is I'm going to be in there, and someone in the chat's going to be like, oh, dummy, don't you know that the Docker file should be configured this way, or why aren't you thinking about this thing? So there's that fear. And I will tell you this, as someone who looks like me, that fear is mostly unfounded. An under-indexed person, it's a very founded fear, because that will happen. Like I rarely have had someone come up and challenge and say, "Oh, what a dumb mistake, Matty. You're so unqualified." People think it's cool. They're like, "Oh, okay, I helped you. I did whatever." If I was a Black woman, I would have a different experience. So that's just, I just want to put that into place. That said, if it's framed in the right way, it is the thing is, it's always safe to say, I don't know. And it's better to say, I don't know than to pretend you know. That's one thing I've learned is, and when I was a sales engineer, customers would ask me questions and I would be like, oh, shoot, I don't know. I don't know what our SSL expiration policy is, but I could just say, I don't know. I'll find out for you. And I think it's a matter of owning things. If it comes up, you say, hey, I'm learning this in the open, and just come out. Nobody, if you embrace what you don't know, and this is a learning approach, but you're super good at what you do know, it kind of comes in. So and I'm bringing this in the context of learning in the open, I'm putting this in, especially because we talked about DevRel, the thing DevRels tend to do, right? We're the ones, we're being a voice of something, and we're all so fearful, we're terrified that someone's going to ask us a question we don't know the answer to, because we're very visible, right? And part of that is, I don't know is fine. As long as it's, I don't know, but I'll find out, or I don't know, does someone else know? But just when we're talking about learning something new, I think another way to do it is to do it incrementally and say, I want to kind of get better at this thing. How can I connect that to something I'm real good at? Because then my cognitive load is less. Kind of think about, if I'm trying to, you only can focus on one thing at a time. I think about, when I did this with public speaking, there's tons of things I want to get better at. And if I go up to give a talk and I'm like, okay, here's like the 15 things I want to try to improve, I won't improve anything, because all I'll be doing is thinking about everything I'm doing wrong. But I say in this talk, my focus is more movement on the stage. Everything else I still do, but that's the only thing I'm thinking about, because all the things I'm really good at take care of themselves. So if you're trying to learn something, think about how you can couple it. Like, hey, I want to learn more about, Postgres vector, PG vector, or something like that. I'm not going to decide to build an application with that in Rust if I've never used Rust before either. Let me go back to my really old standby that I really understand. So only part of what I'm doing is new. That helps two things. One, it helps me focus on the thing I have to learn, because I can only focus on one thing at a time. And if I'm doing it in a visible, vulnerable place, my other expertise will, like the same thing. If someone sits there, I mean, Kelsey Hightower is trying to do something and doing part of Kubernetes, no one's going to be like, okay, you don't know what you're doing, because get overwhelmed with,
you have demonstrable expertise in other ways,
something else, and you're like, well, you don't know this little thing, but so I think that's a helpful approach. It's still hard and scary, and everybody is scared, and I can assure you, people like Kelsey are scared too sometimes, right? Like,
and I think that's a great insight. And I think that also applies to changing jobs. Just like thinking about, there was a point early in my DevRel career where the technology I was dealing with was very different over the course of successive companies. But in every time, my audience, even with those different technologies, was early in career devs. So there was always that strata of, I'm very comfortable with this audience and know who this audience are. Yes, I'm doing a different thing with them, but I have that grounding. So I think, totally agree. I think that's a really good point. On the topic of learning new things, I know you mentioned that obviously now Ivan's a slightly different field, doing data management, less DevOps stuff. But obviously DevOps is a very fast moving field. And I believe there's a new DevOps now is a thing that I saw. That happened. I don't know what's going on with that.
Platform,
or
something
like that. But in all those transitions, you've also got that fast flowing current going past you the whole time. How do you keep up with continual learning as when you're in those roles, especially as someone who with the developer relations slant, you need to kind of be at the forefront very frequently? How have you managed that task?
I mean, part of it is to realize you can't. Hey, it's a fire hose. You're not going to know everything.
Sure.
So one of the things is to be intentional, right? Don't say, hey, I want to learn DevOps, right? Or whatever that means. I'm going to learn cloud. That's so many things, and say what's one do it in pieces, and set realistic expectations as well, which is to say, I'm not going to have, this is my problem. I will do this constantly. I find the weirdest edge cases when I want to learn something new. And I'm like, wow, did I make this hard? No. You know what? Go write the to-do app like everybody else does. Do that. Don't try to create some weird setup, because I have a weird life, right? You know, I mean,
Sure.
like the problems I'm trying to solve are very strange. And so I want to try to solve those problems because it's helpful to me to try to make it applicable. But then it continually ends up with, I have weird problems to solve, you know,
Right.
like don't go and try to learn this new Go framework by building a common open source tool that all DevRels in the world will use to manage their CFPs. Because that's already a hard problem, right? Go write a to-do app. But also and a lot of this has to do with everybody's individual preference of how you learn as well. Like, so for me, and as someone who it continually becomes more and more of a generalist, I find what works really well is things where it's not really learning by osmosis, but this is why podcasts are helpful to me in certain ways, because podcasts are the thing where you just sort of get the general idea of stuff, right? You're most likely not going to listen to a podcast and be like, I really understand the right way to frame my unit tests in Rust.
Sure.
You know, that's hands-on stuff or whatever. But if I want to think about how to approach testing in Rust, that's really good for a podcast because it's ideas. And I can do that and I can let it kind of wash over me. And I tend to do that. Repetition is what helps me with those places. The other thing, though, as much as I said, don't try to make it too hard, I don't really understand things until I can like get myself an actual real world example to solve. And the trick of that is real world. It doesn't have to be actually serving the very weird problem that Matty has right now, but even a problem I've had before, or, you know, and sit there and say like, okay, and how do I connect this to something as a sysadmin? I would have had to, you know, kind of reconfigure my IP tables. That's a problem I understand that people have. Okay, so I'll try to accomplish to that versus if it might be like, well, how do I do sharding in this thing? I'm like, I haven't had to do that before, so I don't even understand it. So it doesn't help me. So I think part of it is set realistic expectations for yourself. Connect to your way of learning. It's sort of these sort of learning styles have been a little bit disproven, I think, about like some people, but learning preferences is a very real thing. You have a preference of how you work and what you want. So having awareness of that, like I am not necessarily a follow videos kind of person. It just doesn't help me as much, but I like to read books. But some people hate to read books and some people want to see videos, which is why in DevRel we create content across all kinds of platforms because everybody has preferences. And then one of the biggest things as well is if you can, and this is the hard one, is a mentor and a coach helps, like someone who can help you, but you be judicious with how you do that, right? You're not, unless you're paying somebody, they're not your tutor. They're not there to hand walk you. But if you're like, hey, who's someone I can, you know, I'm just stuck. Like, can you just like rubber duck with me? Can you kick this around? And that can be either someone who's a big expert in it or a fellow learner who's in the same part of the journey. This is one of the things that, to be quite frank, as we look at all the things that suck about Twitter burning down, boy, was that a helpful thing. I learned so much from having the ability to just throw a question
out and get,
and then you get people ranging from who the heck knows this person is that's got 6 followers doing whatever, or Adam Jacob telling you about how to, you know, or Charity Majors weighing in, and you're like, wow, I can learn a lot from those things. And it's a lot harder now, but you still leverage your network and fellow learners, like get a study buddy. Someone who's trying to learn a similar thing.
For folks who aren't aware of the term rubber ducking, that's when you ask someone a question, and in the act of asking the question and forming that thought, you solve the question yourself. So the asking, as you said, is like more important than the other person necessarily knowing. Just being able to frame that to someone is super helpful.
I've seen people do that even with blog, right? Sometimes if I just write a blog post to try to figure the problem out, by the time I'm done writing the post, I figured it out because I had to write it down.
I will never ever remember the name of this person who said this quote, but like I use it all the time, which is like, writing is a great way to show how lousy your thinking is, and in the act of writing something down, you will often work out the problem, because trying to express it in written words irons it out. Okay, so I want to move track a little bit into kind of talking about the actual practical implications of moving company and how how these transitions work. Something that I am cursed with, and know many people who are cursed with, is after you spent a while at a particular company, you know, there are certain parts of that company culture that you become very fond of, and you don't want to become that person in the next company who's always like, oh, well, at my last place, we did X, Y, or Z all the time. I am that guy on several dimensions. How do you, I guess, like navigate adapting to and, you know, taking bits of company culture with you between these roles?
And you know, it's interesting because it will vary based upon the type of role as well. Sure. But we tend to do this in leadership roles a lot, and sometimes to the detriment. I remember I had a friend of mine who was running marketing at a certain place, and they got a new CMO who came from Coke, and it was very much how do we turn Jim Beam into Coke now, right? And it was like, okay, but there's like there were things that work. What I try to do is everything becomes an amalgamation, right? So and especially as I come into places in more of a leadership role, whether it's as a manager or not, but a lot of places I've been when I come from company to company, that's, I guess, one of the things is partially that's why you're brought over as well, is they're like, okay, what does work? But one thing I learned, and it took me a while to learn, I had like many lessons in my life I have to learn the hard way, is no matter what, I will tell you this, someone, when they hire you, they might say, Joe, I want you to come in here and shake things up.
Sure.
No, they don't. Or if you do that, take a month or two and just have your ears on. There's a
gentle shake.
First 90 days is a great book, right? It's sort of like your first beginning, you like, we feel very needed to like prove ourselves. And honestly, in most places, what we're looking for is, do you know where the bathroom? Right. Like get started. And then, because what if you do that? And I learned this when I came to Ivan, I said, okay. And I was in a scenario where I was like, on one hand, I feel like I'd done that transition a bunch of times where I'm like, okay, I am going to like do it right this time. I'm going to add 2 ears in one mouth and blah, blah, blah. And then landed, and they're like, by the way, you're going to have a new boss. I can't tell you who it is, and they're going to start in a couple months. And I'm like, oh shit, I need to prove something because I'm going to have a new person coming in, and I don't want to sit there and be like, well, I didn't do anything. I figured out where the bathroom was.
Right.
But even so, it was still, so number one, it's absorbing. And then you can start to say, how do these things mesh? Like, what are the things from Chef or PagerDuty or Pulumi, where else I've been, that were really powerful? And I think and again, it comes from it will vary based upon your authority within the group. Like if you're coming in, you have to sort of pitch it like, but either way, we're still doing it, ease into it and treat it like an experiment and say, hey, like, don't come in and say like, here's the 15 different things we did at my last company that were awesome. Like find one and say, can we try this? Let's try this let's try doing our stand-ups this way, because this was really cool. And let me tell you why I thought it was cool, and like lead the rest of the team. And because one of two things might happen. One might be, sure, cool, let's try it. Another might be, I see where you're coming from. Here's context you don't have, which is we have people that are 12 hours apart, so we can't do it this way. But maybe there's a way that's the combo of both. And that's the thing, because doing a cookie cutter and saying, well, this is what we did at my last place will not work at your new place, because your new place is different. But the nugget of it, the kernel of it, the idea and the outcome that came out of it, you can say, what if we put them together? And now we have the really good way that works. And also just sometimes the culture is different. I'm learning this as I've mostly spent most of my career working primarily for US based companies. And actually we had an offsite a few months ago, an all offsite, and one of someone in the team in the company was asking me, said, Matty, have you ever worked for a European company before? And I said, no, not really. And I said, here's all the things I really love. And a lot of this was like standing around at night and something, and a lot of my colleagues were like, okay, but just to be fair, just so you know, because all my European colleagues were like, these things you love are not because it's a European company, it's because it's a Nordic company, you know, or whatever. Or something.
Ivan of Finland, right?
Yes, we're that's a good context for everyone. Ivan was founded in Helsinki, is based in Helsinki. Nordic, Finnish founders, very, very Nordic culture, which has been great. But as we sort of adapt and say, and it's interesting too, because things as a leader that I was like, this is how I want to run a team, and we're going to make a big deal out of this. A lot of my teammates who don't have a lot of this American scar tissue go, I don't understand. Why do we have to do this even? Why? Like, I'll give a great example is I believe strongly in a team culture of when you're on holiday, you're on holiday.
Yes.
So we would sort of joke a little bit like at Pulumi, and Kat Cosgrove and Laura and I would talk about like, if I knew, Joe, if I knew you were on holiday and you showed up in Slack, for lack of a better word, we would bully you out of it. We would say, get the F out of here, right? No, we protect each other. And so I started bringing this up in our team my team up at Ivan about
what are you talking about?
They're like, I don't understand. Who the hell would go on Slack when they're on holiday? Now, to be fair, even like most of my team is European, and they do, I mean, but they think about that as a DevRel thing. So but to me, I went, oh, that's cool. So it's not a solved problem, but we approach it a little differently. But the spirit of this was we take care of each other.
Yeah.
Right. and maybe the way that's addressed is different because the team is different. The humans are different. Like, because some of the patterns and culture that Joe, like you said, you want to bring over from your other place.
Yeah.
Those were created because of the humans that were there.
Sure. Yeah.
You have different humans. You have different problems to solve. But it's like any other type of change. You want to bring people along with you. You want them to be committed and not compliant. Yeah.
Perfect. Absolutely.
You build on the shoulders of giants, right? Like every cool thing that I feel like I've helped make better in the team is, to your point, is all it's a whole assembly of ways we did things in apartments.com and Pulumi and PagerDuty and Chef, but only the good parts.
Right.
Right. Because there's already all the bad parts exist. We don't need to bring bad stuff.
Don't take that with me. Yeah. Perfect. So we're coming close to time. So before we wrap, I want to make sure that we help some folks who are at the very beginning of this journey. So I guess I would say, I would ask, like, first time, what do you think are some common misconceptions that people have about changing roles in the tech industry? What are the real just the real myths, the real rumors that like people really think like they get very hung up on before they make a switch?
I think it is that people expect you to come into a role and already be an expert at doing that thing and doing the thing you've already done.
Right.
But in most cases, there's an expectation of growth.
Yeah.
Because now there's exceptions, right? There are people who will hire and say, I want to hire someone who's done exactly this before. Chances are you're not going to get that person because no one wants to go do the same thing again.
Sure.
But most managers understand that.
Yeah.
So it is a thing to say you need to have the background that we want. So number one, the first misconception I think is that you have to have done the job to get the job. Right. What you have to do is show that you can do the job and you have evidence that you can do the job. That's one thing when you think about switching roles. And I think another misconception though is that you will be guided to that growth as well. Like coming into, I think you want to say, if you want to stretch your legs, if you want to try something that's a challenge, have a plan, right? And because if I'm a hiring manager and you're coming to me and you're saying, okay, Matty, I haven't been a developer advocate before, but I really want to be. Yeah. Sell me on it, right? Sure. You can say I haven't done that job, but I've done the job. Right. I've done the job this way in open source, or I've done this thing. So, so I guess that's less of a misconception and more of advice. But the misconception is that we're hiring people who are already
fully formed and ready to go.
Already there, fully formed, ready to go. And sometimes that's the case. Yeah. And, but it's not a given for sure.
I guess the other dimension, I think I see that a lot as well, is like people investing a lot of, and this already hedging this, like this isn't to say that you shouldn't do things in your own time, but like people investing, like people who are worried about their performance on the job, and so they go spend all of their evenings or all their weekends like studying for the job. And it's like no, that learning and development is part of your job. Like improving on the job is your job, right? I guess that's another way that manifests. No, I think that's a fantastic point.
I think another misconception just in general is that anything is set in stone. Yeah, everything is negotiable,
right?
And
what kind of things are you thinking of here?
Well, just responsibility in the role, money, benefits. I mean, when I say everything is, some things are not, but there's lots of levers to pull. But the other piece of that is, I guess the misconception is, if I don't agree, if I try to negotiate, they'll rescind the offer. Right. Now that will happen. And you know what? I know
that's a good thing for you.
That's a great thing. Yeah. Boy, did you now that's a hard thing to hear when you're like, I've been out of work for 10 months and I have to pay my rent, but
that's
still
a big red flag.
It's a big red flag, and you would probably get screwed somewhere else. And I had a great podcast episode with Cindy Miller recently called "It's Tough Out There." If you go to restdevops.com, and we talked a lot about this combination of this is the general good advice, but then also sometimes you just got to take what you got because you got bills to pay, and there's no shame in that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, take what you have to do and keep looking.
The easiest time to find a job is when you have a job, right?
Always be interviewing. And then I guess like last question, really squeezing this one in there. If you could go back to the beginning of your career and give yourself one piece of advice about, stepping out of your comfort zone, all these marvelous journeys you've taken, serendipity, what would that piece of advice be?
I would say, and again, some of this is based on the time of when it was. Sure. It's not like go buy Apple stock kind of tell us, but get even better at cross-functional collaboration. Like it took me way too long to get past the problem that we all have, which is I'm ops, dev is the enemy.
Right.
We
like our tribes.
Like have that realization happen sooner about that we're all trying to do the same thing, and how can you build those bridges?
Right.
And how to be more of a generalist.
Cool.
Sooner. Learn more. Like learn a little bit about a lot.
Perfect. I think that's a wonderful beat to end on. Matty, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for joining us today.
Super fun.
Beyond the Screen, an IONOS podcast. To find out more about IONOS and how we're the go-to source for cutting-edge solutions in web development, visit ionos.com and then make sure to search for IONOS in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Don't forget to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at IONOS, thanks for listening.